From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Well, the debates are sponsored by a corporation created by the Republican and Democratic Party tyranny, and they don't want competition. Especially, they don't want to hear Jill Stein of the Green Party put forward majoritarian changes in this country, like living wage, full Medicare for all, crack down on corporate crime, reduce the bloated military budget, bring back the soldiers from their empire abroad. And that's what it all means. No choices, no voices when third parties are excluded.
It's official. When the first presidential debate takes place next Monday, a week from today, it will exclude third-party candidates from the debate stage. The Commission on Presidential Debates announced Friday both Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party and Libertarian Governor Gary Johnson failed to qualify by polling at 15% or higher. What is this commission? We'll get reaction from former third-party presidential candidate Ralph Nader, who's been excluded himself in the past. Then what does it mean to break through power?
It means citizens organizing, having full-time advocates, and taking back the power from their elected officials who are often in the pockets of business interests. It's basically sovereignty of the people. It's been done on so many areas, local, national, international, throughout our history, that we ought to learn from our forebears and go forward and exercise the sovereignty of the people as the Constitution singularly provides.
Today, Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate, corporate critic, and three-time presidential candidate, will discuss his forthcoming book ahead of a national conference. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says authorities are searching for a suspect after a string of improvised bombs targeted parts of New York and New Jersey, including a blast Saturday night in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood, which wounded 29 people. Authorities have named the suspect, 28-year-old Ahmad Khan Rahami, who they described as originally from Afghanistan and a naturalized American living in New Jersey. His whereabouts are unknown. Mayor Bill de Blasio said the investigation is moving quickly.
The fact that they have now, in just the last moments, put out a photo shows real confidence on the part of law enforcement that this is someone that is likely involved in one way or another. But we shouldn't speculate yet how many people or what role each person played. What we do know is we need to get this guy in right away. Now, again, my experience with the NYPD and the FBI is once they zero in on someone, they will get them.
Rahami was identified after the FBI detained 5 men Sunday night in Brooklyn. The agency said it's questioning the men without charge in connection with the Chelsea bombing. Police also say they identified a suspect in surveillance video seen planting 2 bombs in Manhattan, including a second device that did not explode and was later recovered. Police told CNN the video has allowed them to identify a person of interest in the attack. It's not known if that person is related to the 5 men detained in Brooklyn. Elsewhere, a pipe bomb left in a garbage can exploded Saturday morning in Seaside Park, New Jersey. No one is injured in the blast, which appeared to target a charity run hosted by the U.S. Marines. And in Elizabeth, New Jersey, early this morning, police discovered a bomb in a backpack at a commuter rail station. Part of the device exploded when a police robot attempted to disarm it. It's not known whether the 3 bombing attempts are related. They came just before world leaders begin converging in New York for this week's meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. The New York Police Department says it'll beef up security with more bag checks in train and subway stations and heavy weapons teams deployed in transit centers. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has called up 1,000 members of the National Guard and police. In Minnesota, a man in a security guard's uniform stabbed and injured 9 shoppers at a mall on Saturday before he was shot dead by an off-duty police officer. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune identified the man as Ahmed Adan, a 22-year-old born in Kenya who grew up in the U.S. An ISIS website claimed responsibility, calling the assailant a, quote, soldier of the Islamic State. FBI Special Agent Rick Thornton said the agency was looking into possible links to terrorism.
Do not at this point in time know whether the subject was in contact with, had connections with, was inspired by a foreign terrorist organization. That's what the investigation is attempting to ascertain at this point in time.
In Syria, a ceasefire continues to unravel after U.S.-led bombers attacked a Syrian military position, killing scores of government soldiers and allowing ISIS fighters to overrun the survivors. U.S. military officials acknowledged Saturday's attack near Deir al-Zur, which killed more than 60 Syrian soldiers, saying they mistakenly believed they were targeting ISIS units. The attack came less than a week into a ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and Russia, meant to separate warring factions and to allow humanitarian aid to reach besieged cities. It prompted Russia to call an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, where Ambassador Vitaly Churkin questioned whether the attack was timed to derail the ceasefire.
It is quite significant and frankly suspicious that the United States chose to conduct this particular airstrike at this time. Why would all of a sudden the United States choose to help the Syrian armed forces defending Deir al-Zur? After all, they did nothing when ISIL was advancing on Palmyra. ISIL made a 100-mile march without being attacked by the coalition.
Russia's foreign ministry accused the White House of defending ISIS, and Syria's government said the attack proved the U.S. was aiding the group in a bid to topple the Assad regime. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, denounced such claims and blasted Russia for calling a meeting of the UN Security Council.
If we determine that we did indeed strike Syrian military personnel, that was not our intention. And we, of course, regret the loss of life. This said, even by Russia's standards, tonight's stunt, a stunt replete with moralism and grandstanding, is uniquely cynical and hypocritical.
Following the U.S. bombing, there were reports of other ceasefire violations across Syria, including at least 4 airstrikes in Aleppo. India's government's accusing Pakistan of involvement in an attack that left 17 of its soldiers dead in an army base in Kashmir. Sunday morning's attack came near the highly militarized line of control between Indian and Pakistani-administered Kashmir. It was one of the deadliest attacks since the start of an armed insurgency began in 1989. Top Indian officials accused Pakistan of backing the attack and supporting terrorism in Kashmir, a claim Pakistan denied. Ram Madhav, the General Secretary of India's ruling BJP party, said the attacks would be heavily punished, writing on Facebook, "For one tooth, the complete jaw. Days of so-called strategic restraint are over," end quote. Amnesty International says a U.S.-made bomb was used in an attack on a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Yemen last month. The August 15th airstrikes by a Saudi-led coalition killed 11 and injured 19 others. Amnesty International today distributed photos it says show a U.S.-made precision-guided Paveway series aerial bomb. The UN says at least 10,000 civilians have died or been wounded in the 18-month conflict. The U.S. continues to supply Saudi Arabia with weapons, including banned cluster bombs. Meanwhile, activists with the anti-war group Code Pink will gather outside Senate offices in Washington today to protest U.S. weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. They're supporting a bill by Senators Chris Murphy, Mike Lee, Al Franken, and Rand Paul, which would block the U.S. from supplying Saudi Arabia with more than $1 billion worth of tanks and other military hardware. Governors in 6 states have declared a state of emergency after nearly 340,000 gallons of gasoline spilled in central Alabama from one of the region's major pipelines, prompting gas prices to rise across the region. The Colonial Pipeline carries 1.3 million barrels of gas a day down to refineries in Texas and Louisiana, accounting for a full 40% of the East Coast gasoline. EPA officials say the massive spill narrowly avoided reaching the Cahaba River, home to endangered species. In news from the ongoing standoff at Standing Rock in North Dakota, a federal appeals court has officially halted construction of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline within 20 miles on either side of Lake Wahe along the Missouri River. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals says this ruling will give the court more time to rule on the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's request for an emergency injunction against construction over concerns it could destroy sacred sites and burial grounds. The emergency injunction was filed by the tribe after a lower court rejected a request for an injunction the previous Friday. This latest ruling now makes mandatory the Obama administration's request that Dakota Access voluntarily cease construction along that same 40-mile stretch. In a separate legal development, a federal judge in Bismarck, North Dakota, has dropped temporary restraining orders against Standing Rock Sioux Chairman David Archambault and other tribal leaders. The restraining orders were part of a SLAP suit, that's a strategic lawsuit against public participation, filed by Dakota Access against leaders of the tribe in August over their participation in protests. Meanwhile, a citizen journalist was arrested and jailed Sunday and charged with criminal trespass after she filmed portions of the pipeline under construction. A live video posted to Facebook shows Sarah Long being asked by private security guards to leave a field near a public highway. She complies and returns to her vehicle, where she's met by police.
Unless I'm being detained, I don't actually want to answer any questions.
Okay, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing.
Okay. Hear that, everybody? I'm under arrest for criminal trespassing.
It's time to end the phone call.
In more news on the Dakota Access Pipeline, police arrested more than 40 people in southeastern Iowa as they crossed onto a Dakota Access Pipeline construction site near where the company plans to bore beneath the Mississippi River. The activists were arrested with plastic handcuffs and were charged with trespassing. This comes less than 3 weeks after 30 others were arrested in Iowa blocking the pipeline's construction. A group of Iowa landowners have also sued the Dakota Access Pipeline Company over its use of eminent domain. In Germany, the party of Angela Merkel lost ground in regional elections that saw the largest vote share for a far-right party in Berlin since World War II. The anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party will gain its first-ever seats in the German parliament after winning 14% of the vote. In France, a 14-year-old Afghan war refugee died in a hit-and-run incident as he attempted to board a moving truck bound for Britain. Charity workers at the Calais refugee camp near the English Channel say the boy had a legal right to travel to Britain, but months of delay in processing his paperwork led the 14-year-old to attempt to stow away on a trip through the Channel Tunnel. The boy, whose name is not being released, was at least the 13th person to die near the port this year and the 3rd child. To see our full report from France's largest refugee camp, the Calais refugee camp known as the Jungle, go to our website at democracynow.org. Hate crimes against Muslims in the U.S. have reached their highest level since just after the 9/11 attacks. New data from researchers at California State University San Bernardino show a 78% rise in attacks, including arson, murder, assault, and violent threats. For the first time, Donald Trump has admitted Barack Obama was born in the United States. His comments came on Friday, more than 5 years after he added his voice to the so-called birther movement. Even as he admitted that Obama was born in the U.S., Trump falsely accused Hillary Clinton of questioning Obama's citizenship.
Hillary Clinton and her campaign of 2008 started the birther controversy. I finished it. I finished it. You know what I mean. President Barack Obama was born in the United States, period.
President Obama laughed off Trump's admission, telling a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation dinner, quote, "In other breaking news, the world is round, not flat."
I am so relieved that the whole birther thing is over. I mean, ISIL, North Korea, poverty, climate change, none of those things weighed on my mind like the validity of my birth certificate.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has once again alluded to violence against Hillary Clinton. At a campaign rally in Miami Friday, Trump claimed Clinton would destroy Second Amendment rights and said her bodyguards should disarm.
I think that her bodyguards should drop all weapons. They should disarm. Right? I think they should disarm immediately. What do you think? Yes? Yes. Yeah. Take their guns away. She doesn't want guns. Let's see what happens to her. Take their guns away. Okay? It'll be very dangerous.
The nation's largest police union has endorsed Donald Trump. More than two-thirds of the National Board of the Fraternal Order of Police voted in favor of the endorsement. In a statement, the FOP said Trump will, quote, "make America safe again." And the Washington Post editorial board is calling for NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden to face criminal charges. In an editorial published Saturday, the Post called on Snowden to return to the United States to face charges under the Espionage Act or to bargain for, quote, "a measure of criminal responsibility for his excesses," end quote. A team of the Washington Post reporters won a Pulitzer Prize in 2014 for covering NSA spying revealed in documents leaked to the Post by Edward Snowden. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Well, it's official. When the first presidential debate takes place next Monday, a week from today, it'll exclude third-party candidates. The Commission on Presidential Debates announced Friday that both Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party and Libertarian Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, failed to qualify by polling at 15% or higher. Johnson is currently polling at 8%, has reached as high as 12% at some points. Dr. Stein is reportedly averaging about 3% and has peaked at 6% in some national polls. A recent poll by Morning Consult found more than half of registered voters believe Johnson should partake in the debate scheduled for September 26, and nearly half believe Stein should as well. This comes as polls show Trump and Clinton are among the least popular major party candidates to ever run for the White House. McClatchy recently polled voters under the age of 30 and found 41% backed Clinton, 23% supported Johnson, 16% backed Stein, and only 9% backed Trump. In 2012, Stein and her running mate Sherry Honkala were arrested as they attempted to enter the presidential debate site at Hofstra University, the same location where next Monday's debate will take place. Democracy Now! Was there at the time of their arrest when the third-party candidates were blocked by a solid wall of police before sitting down on the ground. They were then arrested.
We're here to stand our ground. We're here to stand ground for the American people who have been systematically locked out of these debates for decades by the Commission on Presidential Debates. We think that this commission is entirely illegitimate, that if democracy truly prevailed, there would be no such commission, that the debates would still be run by the League of Women Voters, that the debates would be open.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are obstructing the vehicle of pedestrians and traffic. If you refuse to move, you are subject to arrest. Remove them, bring them back to the rescue, please.
Come on, step up, please. Stand up.
We'll help you. Come on. Thank you, man. Thank you, ladies. Watch the flag. Please.
That's the Green Party's presidential candidate in 2012, Jill Stein, seeking entrance to the presidential debate at the time at Hofstra. This year, she's continued to demand four-way presidential debates and said in a statement she plans to show up with hundreds of supporters outside that first debate. The debates are organized by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is controlled by the Democratic and Republican parties. It said it'll review the criteria for the second and third debates in the future. In a minute, we'll be joined by former third-party presidential candidate Ralph Nader. But first, this is George Farah, the founder and executive director of Open Debates, speaking on Democracy Now! About how the Democrats and Republicans took control of the debate process.
The League of Women Voters ran the presidential debate process from 1976 until 1984, and they were a very courageous and genuinely independent, nonpartisan sponsor. And whenever the candidates attempted to manipulate the presidential debates behind closed doors, either to exclude a viable independent candidate or to sanitize the formats, the League had the courage to challenge the Republican Democratic nominees and, if necessary, go public. In 1980, independent candidate John B. Anderson was polling about 12% in the polls. The League insisted that Anderson be allowed to participate because the vast majority of the American people wanted to see him. But Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, refused to debate him. The League went forward anyway and held a presidential debate with an empty chair showing that Jimmy Carter wasn't going to show up. 4 years later, when the Republican Democratic nominees tried to get rid of difficult questions by vetoing 80 of the moderators that they had proposed to host the debates, the League said this is unacceptable. They held a press conference and attacked the campaigns for trying to get rid of difficult questions. And lastly, in 1988 was the first attempt by the Republican and Democratic campaigns to negotiate a detailed contract. It was tame by comparison, a mere 12 pages. It talked about who could be in the audience and how the format would be structured. But the League found that kind of lack of transparency and that kind of candidate control to be fundamentally outrageous and antithetical to our democratic process. They released the contract and stated they refused to be an accessory to the hoodwinking of the American people and refused to implement it. And today, what do we have? We have a private corporation that was created by the Republican Democratic parties called the Commission on Presidential Debates. It seized control of the presidential debates precisely because the League was independent, precisely because this women's organization had the guts to stand up to the candidates that the major party candidates had nominated.
That's George Farah, the founder and executive director of Open Debates. For more on the Commission on Presidential Debates, who's excluded from the first presidential debate of 2016, we're joined by someone who's been through this before. Yes, four-time presidential candidate Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate and corporate critic, has a new book out, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. He is speaking today here in New York. Ralph, talk about this decision that just came down. No third-party candidates in the first debate. You know this well.
Well, corporations are deciding who debates, when they debate, who asks the questions. So in the primaries, you had major corporations decide who gets on, who doesn't. They excluded, for example, the former head of the IRS, Mr. Iverson, former deputy of Immigration Service, the only man who had any experience in the federal government because he didn't have a super PAC sponsoring him. And you can see what they did with Dennis Kucinich in 2012. Now we have the Super Bowl of debates, and we have another corporation which is funded by other corporations like Anheuser-Busch, Ford Motor Company, AT&T. They have these hospitality suites at the debate location, and this is controlled by the two-party tyranny that doesn't want any competition, doesn't want voices that represent majoritarian directions in this country, like living wage, full Medicare for all, crackdown on corporate crime, pulling back on empire, civil liberties advance instead of the Patriot Act. All of these are represented by our third parties, which cannot reach tens of millions of people. You see, it's basically a terminal exclusion, because you can go and speak to the biggest crowds of all. I filled Madison Square Garden, the Boston Garden, the Target Center. I reached less than 2% of the people I could have reached had I been on one debate. And the polls again and again showed that a majority of the people want more people on that stage. They don't just want the Republican and Democratic Party going through basically parallel news conferences. They're not really debates.
Well, I mean, let's take something like what this community has gone through this weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, we are sitting in Chelsea, between where on 27th Street a pressure cooker with wires linked to a flip phone was found, and 23rd Street, where some kind of device went off, injuring 29 people. They're all out of the hospital now. It was put in or near a dumpster that was part of construction in front of the Home of the Blind on 23rd Street between 6th and 7th. Some have said Donald Trump is one terrorist attack away from the presidency. We're now looking at, we don't know any details yet about whether the explosion on 23rd Street, the pressure cooker on 27th Street, the backpack in Elizabeth that was just blown up this morning, New Jersey, outside of the train station, or 5 men who were detained earlier in a car, as well as another New Jersey attack this weekend. We don't know any more information than that, though I'm sure the authorities do. How does a debate that includes 4 different candidates impact what we're dealing with this weekend?
Because candidates like Jill Stein and Gary Johnson of the Green Party and Libertarian Party, respectively, will show that when we are in their backyard supporting their dictators overseas, military attacks everywhere, it's been going on for 100 years, eventually they're going to want to come into our backyard. Now, Trump's not going to say that, Clinton's not going to say that, but these 2 parties are going to say that. What's really important is we don't have a debate on empire. We don't have a debate that we're all over the world, that we're breaching national sovereignties, violating our Constitution, killing anybody the president wants to kill. And we see it in Yemen, you see it in Afghanistan, Iraq, now Syria, and many other countries. So it's not working. What started with a criminal gang in northeast Afghanistan has now spread into 20 countries. They're more trained, they're more adept in social media, they've got more people, and they're heading this way. So Trump will only exacerbate that because he takes everything personally in terms of his ego. He has no impulse control, and he'll lash out with brute force, and it will only come back. And we are far more vulnerable than other countries. I mean, we totally freak out with an explosion here or a shooting there compared to what happens in Baghdad or in Afghanistan every day. So we are extremely vulnerable. The last thing we want is someone in the White House who believes in brute force. And I'm sorry to say that Hillary Clinton has that tendency as well when she advances U.S. foreign policy.
Would you say Hillary Clinton is more hawkish than Donald Trump?
Well, she's more systemically hawkish, like she'll go and try to persuade successfully Barack Obama to topple the Libyan regime, which has resulted in huge areas of Africa now in total chaos and violence. What the problem is with Trump is he's unpredictably belligerent. And he brings his personality into the White House. You cannot, as president, take every slur, every criticism, every affront from Congress or some foreign leader personally and translate that into military options.
What is the answer? You're a 4-time presidential candidate. How do you think you deal with what is referred to as terror in the world? Terror, certainly, the killing of innocent civilians. The question is what we consider a terroristic act and what we don't consider a terroristic act.
Well, first of all, the state terrorism is killing far more people than stateless terrorism. What's important is the brute force doesn't work. You're going against people, many of them in their 20s, have nothing to lose. There's nothing more dangerous than an unemployed person who has no purpose left in life except to attack the invader. And so it's a losing proposition. We have to wage peace. We have to use a fraction of the money we use for armaments abroad, making things worse, dealing with health care and clean drinking water and agricultural co-ops, all the things, and education, all the things that will build support for peaceful resolution of disputes and support for the United States. You know, it's as they say, it's not rocket science. The proof in the pudding is that our government does not learn from its failures. There is no flunking grade for brute force in military and foreign policy. And the essence of it has to go down to us, we the people. I mean, if we got reasonable arms control and reduction because a few thousand people in this country organized groups like SANE in the past and led to arms control agreements between Washington and Moscow. It never takes more than 1% of the people representing the public sentiments of the majority to change power, to break through power. I mean, we have historical records of that going back 200 years. Why don't we learn from that? Because if we sit down as spectators, we're spectators watching the debates, what an absurdity. Every city in this country is full of people who want presidential debates. So why don't people organize? They'll start with the Chamber of Commerce, the labor unions, the neighborhood groups in every city, Atlanta, in Seattle, in Los Angeles, in New York, and you say, the heck with this corporation that limits debates. We want the candidates to come to our city. There's nothing that can stop that. Why are we rationing debates? We don't ration cosmetics. We don't ration all kinds of trivia. Why are we rationing debates? Because we're spectators. Because we're told, shut up and shop, and once in a while look at politics because it's now entertainment. I mean, Trump has turned elections from circuses to burlesque shows. And it's making money for these corporations, CNN and Fox and others. And we're sitting around watching it when we have the sovereign power under the Constitution. Corporation isn't even mentioned in the Constitution. Political parties aren't even mentioned. Amy, why are they controlling us? So we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and grab the reins of our country for ourselves and our posterity. There's nothing stopping us from doing this. It's just a sort of, resignation. Whatever will be, will be. Let's go back to our private lives, not be public citizens.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. We're talking to Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate, four-time third-party presidential candidate. His new book is headlined or titled, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute. Magnetic Fields, The Book of Love. Congratulations to Michelle Lauberk and Mike Burke. Mike Burke is our senior producer. That was the music for their first dance Saturday night when they got married. Yes, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest for the hour is Ralph Nader, consumer advocate, four-time presidential candidate. In July, former Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders formally endorsed Hillary Clinton. He's consistently argued against voting for a third-party candidate. In an interview with the Washington Post last week, Sanders said, quote, "This is not the time for a protest vote in terms of a presidential campaign. I ran as a third-party candidate," he said. "I'm the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress." He said, "I know more about third-party politics than anyone else in Congress." In an interview with MSNBC's Chris Hayes, Senator Sanders explained his opposition to a protest vote.
All right. You disagree with Hillary Clinton on this or that. You may not like her on every respect, but look at the real issues that impact your lives, your children's lives, the future of this country, and you will end up concluding that right now is not the time to be supporting a protest vote. Right now, we have to make sure that Trump does not become president.
That is Senator Sanders. Ralph Nader, your response.
Well, it is a time for Senator Sanders to mobilize as he can all his supporters around the country with mass rallies to put the heat on both candidates. Is anything wrong with that? He should have a mass rally in the mall and then spread it all over the country. So you have civic pressure, citizen pressure coming in on all the candidates to further the just pathways of our society. Why doesn't he do that? Because, you know, Bernie Sanders hasn't returned a call from me in 18 years. He's a lone ranger. He doesn't like to be pushed into more progressive action than he is willing to adhere to. As a result, millions of his voters now are in disarray. They don't know where to go. They're cynical. Some will go Democrat. Some will support Libertarian, Green. Some will stay home. And so this huge, wonderful effort that he launched is now aborted. It's dissipating. So it isn't a matter of either or. It's a matter of him cutting out from the accolades to Hillary, which he doesn't like to do. He doesn't like to be a robot or run around the country that way, and mobilize the citizenry, which will transcend the election and start something effective after the election.
Talk about I want to go through the records of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. How would you characterize Donald Trump and what he represents, from foreign policy to domestic politics, specifically what he is saying that he would do as president of the United States? Well,
you don't know what he's going to do, and he doesn't know what he's going to do. He's basically wondering how he ever got to the top of the Republican Party and turned it into the Trump dump. He has no impulse control. He has no factual content in his head. He doesn't really know much about anything other than being a gambling casino czar that goes bankrupt and creams off the crop and leaves the devastation to the workers and the creditors and the small business suppliers. Donald Trump has cheated everybody he has been able to cheat. He's cheated workers, small businesses, taxpayers. He's cheated creditors. And almost everything he attacks people for, he has done in spades. He refuses to release his tax returns because it not only shows he hardly pays any taxes, and he's a corporate welfare king, getting all kinds of freebies from the taxpayer, but he has entanglements with his partnerships all over the country and the world that may prove very embarrassing to him. So this is what the Republican Party has reaped by allowing the electoral process to be commercialized and corporatized. So if you say, what is he going to do? The one thing we know is if anybody dares offend his ego, they're going to get a lashback. And when you've got your hand on a nuclear button and you've got the kind of power you have in the White House, that's a very dangerous option.
Talk about some of his domestic policies. For example, New York Times investigation has found Donald Trump has received at least $885 million in New York City tax breaks for his real estate projects since 1980. The Times also reports Trump successfully sued 3 mayoral administrations when the city sought to deny him tax breaks for a pair of Trump skyscrapers. You must have read that front page story. Yes. For his supporters, they may say the man uses the loopholes, which means he knows the loopholes, and then he'll close the loopholes. Is that true?
It's interesting. The millions of his supporters would be very, very critical of a neighbor that worked the welfare system unfairly. And he's a corporate welfare king. He's a freeloader. He's a freeloader on the backs of taxpayers who have to make up the difference for the taxes he doesn't pay or get less public services. So to the Trump supporters who are believed to take any criticism of Trump personally, to them, I say, reduce Trump to a neighbor and see if you'd really want to live next to that man who is a boastful, pontificating, empty suit, and who lies as a matter of conviction rather than just principle.
Last week, the Trump campaign proposed cutting back on food safety regulations, arguing they're burdensome to farmers and, quote, overkill. But the campaign later deleted the proposal from its website and offered no explanation. In fact, in the fact sheet, the campaign had said, quote, The FDA food police, which dictate how the federal government expects farmers to produce fruits and vegetables and even dictates the nutritional content of dog food, unquote. The statement went on to say, quote, the rules govern the soil farmers use, farm and food production hygiene, food packaging, food temperatures, and even what animals may roam, which fields and when. It also greatly increased inspections of food facilities and levies new taxes to pay for this inspection overkill. That was the fact sheet that's no longer on the website. Your response? Well,
maybe someone who runs Trump Hotels says you better have strong regulation of food, otherwise your guests are going to come down with contaminated food sickness. That's part of his lashing out. He's trying to appeal to the corporations that are now funding him after he said nobody funds him. He funds his own campaign. This is the Trump campaign tells a lot about the failure of our educational system, where millions of people come out of our schools and either unwilling or unable to separate truth from fiction and lies from propaganda. It also, the Trump campaign tells us that there's no level of degradation that the mass media will not descend to in order to make a profit with high ratings covering his bombastic, wild statements against people. It's interesting, he keeps saying crooked Hillary. We're the Democrats to give him his nickname, Cheating Donald. I even wrote a column on this. You go to nader.org. He's cheated everything he's touched over the years.
Let's be specific.
Yeah. Well, for example, he's gone bankrupt deliberately 4 or 5 times in his Atlantic City and other casinos because he rakes off the cream from the bankruptcy and he gets rid of his debts. So he's cheating his creditors. He's cheating his workers who are left on the street. With Trump University, he's cheated his students. That's now in litigation. He's cheated the taxpayers because anybody who's a corporate welfare king is a freeloader on the backs of middle-class taxpayers who have to pay their taxes. And he's boastfully cheated on matrimony. Imagine a guy boasting about cheating in the past on his own matrimony. You have evangelicals supporting him. You see, he is doing us a favor by showing us the degree of disintegration in our society, civically and otherwise. That's why we're holding this 4 days convocation in Washington, 2 at Constitution Hall, called Breaking Through Power.
This is in Washington, D.C.
In Washington, D.C., September 26, 27, 28, 29. And it's basically a remobilization of the civic society with the major civic leaders of our time, some of them starting back in the late 60s and 70s, that helped transform our country a lot in terms of nutrition and food, such as Dr. Michael Jacobson, or transforming our energy options into sustainable energy efficiency, like David Freeman, who ran 4 public utilities like the TVA. He's a real expert. This is a mobilization that we want people to come to. And you can go to breakingthroughpower.org and get really excited and get empowered, or you can call directly Ticketmaster, the 1-800 number, 745-3000, 745-3000. It's only $10 a day, and you can get scholarships. So there's no barrier to entry.
Well, let's talk about some of the issues you're going to talk about, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I want to get your views on both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Sure. But before I do, who will you be voting for, Ralph Nader?
I never say who I vote for. I'm certainly not going to vote for either Hillary or Trump. Listen, if I don't have a third party to vote for, I'll write in my vote. I will never vote for someone who is going to engage in illegal, armed force, unconstitutional, killing innocent people, selling Washington to Wall Street, and driving our country into the ground, all the time sugarcoating the American people on TV with rhetoric.
So the idea that some people have that is very much pushed about swing state strategy, you don't agree with?
No, because it's very easy. Let's say you're in a swing state and you think that the least worst candidate is Hillary. What you do is you go with a Trump voter who thinks the Trump voter is the least, and you trade off. You say, look, you won't vote for Trump and I won't vote for Hillary. Let's make a deal, and then we'll vote for whoever we want to in terms of our conscience, third party or whatever. There are already computerized systems for this underway. You can actually join the network. And now get rid of that. But what Bernie Sanders never talks about is if we had proportional representation, instant runoff voting, all the spoiler stuff wouldn't be around. And the idea of calling a third-party spoiler, using the First Amendment right to run for office, as a politically bigoted word, and it should never be tolerated by the American people, because everyone has an equal right to run for office. Everyone's going to get votes from one another, so they're either spoilers of one another or none of them are spoilers.
People refer back to your presidential candidacy in the midst of the Al Gore-George W. Bush race back in 2000.
Sure.
Talk about you as the spoiler. You have always said this is absolutely wrong. Why?
Well, it's wrong from a First Amendment point of view. First of all, you should never tell anybody to shut up. And when you run for office, it's free speech, petition, and assembly. It's the consummate use of the First Amendment. But here, it's a scapegoating. The Democrats could never get over how they couldn't beat this bumbling governor from Texas who couldn't put a paragraph together and has a horrible record of children and women and pollution, et cetera, policy, right?
You're talking about George W.
George W. Bush. So they scapegoat the Greens. So here's how it goes. 300,000 registered Democrats in 2000 in Florida voted for Bush. Blame the Greens. Thousands of people were misidentified as ex-felons by Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State for Jeb Bush, governor of Florida. Blame the Greens. The butterfly ballot, which is very deceptive and got people to vote for exactly the opposite candidate in South Florida, blame the Greens. Scalia's political 5-4 decision, which blocked the Florida Supreme Court's full recount in Florida, blame the Greens. The Electoral College took the victory in the popular vote from Gore, blame the Greens. Gore loses his Tennessee state, where he represented in Congress for years, blame the Greens. It's total scapegoating. It's disgusting that extremely smart people who happen to be Democratic Party apparatchiks, like Howard Dean, who's now in a corporate firm that lobbies for the healthcare and drug industry, by the way, and never identified as such by the New York Times and others who quote him, he's now reviving this 2000 nonsense.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate, ran for president 4 times. He has a new book out. It's called Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think, and he has a 4-day conference next week demanding people break through power. Stay with us. Along in the Sun, Tyler Ramsey, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Our guest for the hour is Ralph Nader, 4-time former presidential candidate, consumer advocate. I want to talk about Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. You fought against NAFTA. That was under President Clinton. Now the TPP. Hillary Clinton initially supported the deal, but then spoke out against it when she was running in the Democratic primary against Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has lambasted trade deals. At the G20 summit earlier this month, President Obama tried to assure Asian countries that the U.S. will ratify the TPP despite mounting opposition.
On the merits, it is smart for America to do it. And I have yet to hear a persuasive argument from the left or the right as to why we wouldn't want to create a trade framework that raises labor standards, raises environmental standards, protects intellectual property, levels the playing field for U.S. businesses, brings down tariffs. It is indisputable that it would create a better deal for us than the status quo.
That was Ralph Nader. That was President Obama. Ralph Nader. Talk about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton's stances on the TPP and what they mean.
Well, Trump says he's against it, but you can't believe anything he says. He'll back down according to any opportunistic lever that he might want to hold should he ever become president.
Do you think he has a chance?
I don't think so, but it all depends on whether Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton start advancing authentic majoritarian issues before people and workers in this country. And Hillary Clinton is going quiet now. After she vanquished Bernie Sanders at the convention, she's not speaking that much against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which empties jobs from this country, raises drug prices, and subordinates our own sovereignty in consumer, labor, and environmental protection. Why? Because Barack Obama is going to make a major move in December in the lame duck session, and she doesn't want to embarrass him. And so she's going quiet. The usual reversal from rhetoric that the Clintons have been known for. But why is there opposition really on the ground against TPP? Because of building civic skills. That's what Lori Wallach has done with Global Tradewide. That's what our mobilization next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in Washington, if you let me just illustrate, the first day is, and these are from major civic leaders and doers, building civic skills and breaking through apathy. Wouldn't people want to be in the auditorium for that? Controlling what we own, shifting the power. People don't realize that we own the greatest wealth in the country. The public lands onshore, offshore, the public airways, trillions of dollars of government research and development, not to mention all kinds of intellectual property, but we don't control it. And so we're going to have a whole day by the experts on how you shift power so that we control what we own. We have our own audience networks. We control the public lands. We deal with the things that our assets are involved in. And the third deals with citizen action models on September 28th. And the fourth is the liberation movements from medieval England that are being crushed. The law of torts, the law of wrongful injury, if somebody wrongful injures you with a medicine that's hazardous or a defective car, and the law of contracts, which we've given up with the fine print contracts. I don't know anybody who hasn't signed on the dotted line and given away their rights to these vendors. So do contact breakingthroughpower.org and Ticketmaster 1-800-745-3000.
Well, I want to talk about the theme of the conference and also the fact that it is the 50th anniversary of your book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which prompted Congress to enact the most sweeping auto safety law in U.S. history. 50th anniversary of the signing of the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act and the Highway Safety Act. President Johnson signed the landmark legislation September 9th, 1966, greatly reducing the annual number of traffic fatalities. It set mandatory federal safety standards for vehicles and drivers, established the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Our guest today, Ralph Nader, went on to win a major settlement against GM, that's General Motors, for spying on him and trying to discredit him, and used the lawsuit's proceeds to start the Center for the Study of Responsive Law. This is Ralph pointing out the safety flaws of General Motors' Chevrolet Corvair.
What aggravates the problem is that the rear wheels of the Corvair begin to tuck under. And as they tuck under, the angle of tuck under is called camber. And as they tuck under, it can go from 3 or 4 degrees camber to 11 degrees camber almost in an instant. And when that happens, nobody can control the Corvair.
Well, then surely they did the right thing. They found out there was something wrong with the car and they fixed it.
Yes, the question is, why did it take them 4 years to find out? This is my point. Either it's sheer callousness or indifference, or they don't bother to find out how their cars behave.
That was Ralph Nader back in the 60s. Ralph, what's happened in this 50 years?
What's happened is whenever we've advanced anything, it's been less than 1% of people around the country in various congressional districts supported by public opinion, whether it's food safety, cleaner air, cleaner water, improved information flows, freedom of information law. People have got to realize. That's why I call breaking through power, it's easier than we think. I'm full of examples of where a few people started the ball rolling. Lois Gibbs starting this group out of Love Canal all over the country against toxic contamination of people's homes and neighborhoods. She had no power at all, but she built power.
Compare the number of people who die in terrorist attacks to the number of people who die, well, in very different situations that you've been taking on for years.
Okay, take a study by Johns Hopkins University Medical School last March and break it down. And in the period when these bombs are being discovered in trash cans in New York, 25 people have died in the New York area from mishaps and hospitals. Hospital-induced infections, hospital malpractice, bad prescription of drugs. Totally, it's 700 a day. This is a silent violence from corporate negligence that includes air pollution, includes a lot of other hazards from negligent or criminal corporations. But silent violence doesn't get on TV. It's overt violence that gets on TV, which is more like street crime or violent attacks. So, but by far, the greatest number of Americans who are dying from preventable causes are from corporate misbehavior, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, contaminated water, hospital hazards, you name it. And it's all documented by groups like Harvard Medical School, Harvard School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins, but very little, if anything, is done about it because it emanates from profit-making corporations that put money into political campaigns. But that doesn't stop people from organizing in each congressional district. You can transform this country with Congress watchdog groups in each congressional district representing majority opinions. A lot of left-right support for change in this country.
Let me ask you something. A lot of progressives who don't want to go the major party route, who are deciding perhaps between Jill Stein and Gary Johnson. Libertarian Party, known as pro-LGBT, pro-choice, what are the other, anti-interventionist. But when you talk about issues of regulations that are so close to your heart, that where you talk about saving so many lives, where does the Libertarian Party come down?
Terrible. They're against health and safety regulation. They're against Medicare, full Medicare for all. That's their very serious weak point, and they can't back it up with many facts, unfortunately. But as you say, they're against empire. They're for civil liberties, and they're for civil rights. But very incomplete party.
What would no corporate regulation look like?
Well, it would. You would repeal. They would actually get rid of the federal regulatory agencies. They want to get rid, some of them, of the IRS. I don't know how they're going to collect taxes, but they're really estranged from reality in that way. But you take them for what they are. They are good on civil liberties. They are good against empire, and they don't like the bloated military budget. But they're very incomplete. They haven't figured out how do you build all these public works that they use every day, all these public services.
This is the 50th anniversary of Unsafe at Any Speed, of you launching the many different groups to push the country, the government, to make people safer. What do you think has been accomplished? What are you proudest of in this 50 years?
Well, you know, the air, water is cleaner. That's one. Much safer in cars. It's 1/5 the risk of getting killed in a car by given 100 million vehicle miles. We have the best Freedom of Information Act in the world, and we got to use it more. We have civil rights laws that we don't use enough of. We have the law of wrongful injury that's very underutilized. Most of the people who are wrongfully injured are not finding their way to a lawyer against the perpetrator of their harms so they can get compensated and deter other unsafe characteristics. So there has been, but in the foreign and military area, it's been very, very regressive. It's been worse, more risky, more empire, more illegal actions.
And what do you think that would change that in 20 seconds?
Again, it's the Congress, it's Congress watchdog groups, and it's doing me a favor, folks, by showing up at Constitution Hall and calling Ticketmaster for the next 4 days, 1-800-745-3000. Be there.
Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate, corporate critic, four-time presidential candidate. His new book, Breaking Through Power, It's Easier Than We Think. He'll be speaking and doing a book signing tonight at Barnes & Noble in New York City at Union Square at 7 p.m. Then from September 26th to September 29th, the first 2 days at Carnegie Institution, and then the 28th and 29th at Constitution Hall, will be the Breaking Through Power Conference. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by a remarkable group of people. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.